Silent Hill has never been just a haunted town. At its core, it's a place where human trauma refuses to stay buried, a mirror reflecting the things we hide from ourselves. Most of us avoid remembering the pain inflicted by abusive parents, the guilt of hurting friends, or the relentless ways the world makes us feel small. In Silent Hill, none of that stays hidden. Each story forces its characters to confront what they've tried to repress, and when the mind and the supernatural collide, reality becomes a crucible of fear. In this installment, the setting shifts to 1960s Japan, where we meet Hinako, a young woman already scarred by those closest to her. What begins as a life marked by subtle social cruelty and familiar oppression is quickly swallowed up by the horrors of Silent Hill. The monsters, the suffocating fog, the rituals, the scarlet rot. All of it emerges from the lived trauma she carries, and in doing so, the game puts her squarely at the heart of Silent Hill's design philosophy, externalizing wounds that never healed. One of Hinako's earliest injuries came as a child, when she was ostracized for refusing to conform. She played with the boys in a society that demanded strict gender roles, girls with dolls, boys with games, and that deviation marked her as an outsider. Social exclusion at such a formative stage can fracture identity, lowering self-esteem and fostering a lasting sense of alienation. At home, her wounds were even deeper. Hinako's father was violent and unpredictable, turning the family's home into a space of fear. Her mother, passive and compliant, enabled the abuse, creating a collusive dynamic, one parent's cruelty reinforced by the other's submission. This toxic system made escape impossible. As research in trauma psychology shows, children in such environments develop what's known as complex trauma, chronic exposure to fear and harm in a setting that should be safe. For Hinako, survival meant becoming small, quiet, and compliant, but her rebellious personality complicated that, forcing confrontations she could never win. Yet even amid this, Hinako had a lifeline, her older sister, Junko. Junko offered a support system, a temporary anchor amidst chaos. But this stability was short-lived. When Junko married and joined the very societal system Hinako despised, that anchor vanished. Hinako was left adrift, forced to navigate her fracturing identity alone. Silent Hill amplifies these fractures, forcing Hinako to confront her divided self. She journals about two versions of herself, the true Hinako and the one society demanded she become, the version shaped by cultural and familiar expectations. The wedding dress monster, the Shiromuku, is the physical embodiment of that split, a haunting literalization of the identity she was forced to reject. While some might consider Hinako's split as dissociative identity disorder, the evidence doesn't quite fit. What she experiences is a spectrum of dissociation, depersonalization, feeling detached from her actions, and derealization, feeling the world as unreal. Her encounter with Silent Hill's horrors externalized this dissociation, allowing the player to see her fractured psyche in action. Each monstrous encounter, from corrupted family members to obsessive friends, represents a different crack in her identity: betrayal, envy, suffocation, abandonment, and forced conformity. Substance use compounds Hinako's struggles. From the start, she relies on red capsules, painkillers meant to restore health in-game, but symbolic of her attempt to regain control over a life dominated by trauma. Relief leads to dependence, dependence leads to a distortion, and distortion leads to guilt and terror. When her father forces her into marriage, selling her to settle his debt, Hinako reaches her breaking point. The ritualistic wedding is both a literal and symbolic erasure of self. Branding, mutilation, and forced compliance reduce her to function rather than personhood. In this crucible, survival and annihilation exist side by side. The Shiromuku and the pregnant, bloated monster becomes mirrors of her internalized rage and despair. Her fantasy of destroying those who hurt her, the very rage she once imagined wielding against her parents, turned inwards, consuming her identity until it erupts into violence. The wedding ritual, intended to annihilate her, instead catalyzes a psychotic breakdown, as seen in the psychosis ending where Hinako's repression, rage, and despair manifest in a Red Wedding massacre. Even her relationships, twisted by jealousy, insecurity, and societal pressure, become weapons against her. Friends like Rinko, Sakuko exaggerate familiar pains, envy, obsession, and suffocating attachment. Her sister, parents, and peers all contributed to the fractured self she must navigate. In the end, Hinako is forced to confront the reality that her life, shaped by abuse, societal expectations, and cultural suffocations, leaves little room for personal agency. She can only let the world define her, becoming the very horrors she once feared, or attempt to reclaim control through the only means available: survival in the face of annihilation. Silent Hill F is more than horror. It's a psychological exploration of trauma, identity, and the devastating costs of a society that suppresses individuality, particularly for women. Hinako's journey reminds us that the line between the supernatural and the human mind is often indistinguishable, and that horror, in its purest form, is often drawn from the very reality itself.